Hello, and welcome to my presentation on the Young Latinas of Omaha, Nebraska by me, Elizabeth Ravello. My general research experiences overview. This started from my childhood when I grew up in Koza, Nebraska. And while I am half white and half Hispanic, I was assimilated into the white Midwestern culture growing up. And I watched as my Latina peers in central Nebraska grew up with double standards for their male relatives, such as brothers and cousins. As I did my research experiences, I wanted to interview young girls and women of today and see the similarities or differences between when I grew up as a teenager versus now. And I found a common theme in my research and in my interviews of Latinas having barriers and high expectations from family and less opportunities. Throughout this semester, I have been reflecting on my assimilated upbringing versus my peers' authentic upbringing in their culture and my own reflecting on my own imposter syndrome where I feel like I did not belong. And I also did a little bit of research on the Latina culture and how the media and the Latino machismo culture influences how Latinas view themselves, either as cholas or always pregnant or conniving. Starting with my Latina cultural statistics, unfortunately, I could not find a lot of specific statistics in Omaha or in central Nebraska, specifically just on Latinas. Uh, Unfortunately, Hispanic and the Latino and Latina population are all lumped together in mainly a monolithic group, unfortunately. But what I did find in the recent 2020 US Census data that was recorded, about 14.1% of the Omaha population is Hispanic. And in the Nebraska Hispanic Latino population recorded in 2018, 31% out of the entire Hispanic population in Nebraska is ranges in age from 0 to 24 years of age, which that's what my focus was on, was young girls and young women today. And I also found that 52% of all Hispanic women in the population are 24 years of age or younger. As I talk about Latina educational issues, unfortunately, a lot of data gathered in Nebraska is focused on Hispanics and Latino and Latina children, graduates, and college students as a whole, rather than thinking about the intersectionality of just Latinas and Latina girls and in eight ranging in age. So the intersectionality of Latina girls and young women were hard to find in my research. However, overall, in my research, I found that Latinos were less likely to graduate from high school, be prepared academically for college, and go to post secondary institutions. I even found a study that was connecting with Latina military connected undergraduates in their first year of college, both those who were actively either active duty, reservist, or National Guard, as well as Latina veterans. And out of the sample size of 142, 23.2% of them, of the Latina military connected undergraduates, were female. And when they self reported in the survey about being prepared to go to college and whatnot, they said that 19% of them needed academic remediation done in math and 18% needed remediation done in writing. When it came to self reporting, if they would need academic remediation in the future in college to make sure that they are adequately prepared and passing their college courses, a lot of them, it was a higher percentage saying that they would need much higher academic remediation in math, that 40% recorded so, and almost 32% of the Latino and Latina military connected undergraduates reported that they would need academic remediation in writing. So, as we view this from the Nebraska Minority Population Report Card, as well as getting ready for post secondary readiness, you will find that 7% of the Hispanic population uh, met all four ACT benchmark scores, which In this, it says percentages of ACT tested high school students in the graduating class of 2020 who met or exceeded ACT college readiness benchmark scores that indicate sufficient preparation for college level courses. Look at how that compares to their white peers, Asian, and their other minority peers. It could be a factor of maybe teachers are holding Hispanic students to a lower expectations because of an implicit bias, and we as teachers need to be doing much better. As we move on from that, you can see that since much fewer of them are meeting all four of the ACT benchmark scores, you can also see that they have much lower ACT scores in general compared to their white peers. See, the white peers, back in 2010 were at a 22, then a little bit less than a 22, and around a 21. Whereas here, they were consistently less than even 20, and they remain over 20. And while ACT scores do not measure intelligence, they can help students figure whether or not they can get scholarships, financial aid, and whatnot. When it comes to graduation, you can see that the Latino and Latina population actually graduate at much lower levels than their white peers. It's consistently over 90%, but as you'll see, the Latino and Latina population are consistently 80% or less across the board for the last 10 years. And that's simply not acceptable. We should be making sure that we are getting them to meet all their basic necessities, as well as making sure they're academically prepared to graduate from high school. And lastly, as you'll see, the first time freshman enrollments at Nebraska post secondary institutions by race, ethnicity, and by sector, you can see that their white peers are accepted to the University of Nebraska at a much higher rate, and the Hispanic peers are going to college at Nebraska community colleges at a much higher rate, whether it's because of cost, being it closer to home and to family. I think while community colleges are great, we should also be pushing just as much for them to be attending four-year colleges. As for CRT strategies for Latinas, I wanted to talk about some of the readings we did in class, such as with the culturally relevant pedagogy that we read in Ladson Billings. Students must experience academic success, cultural competence, and critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo of the current social order. Number two, there's a post-pandemic pedagogy that we read about where minority students have the most to lose by going back to the normal standards before the pandemic. The increased write-ups, the less access to technology and textbooks, the history of lower test scores as well. We've seen this in the previous studies I just showed you with the ACT test scores. More suspensions and more special education resources. Number three, being aware of bias, being less afraid of addressing bias, approaching more so from and making sure that when we talk to our colleagues, I know I see it in my own school. I am the only Latina teacher at my school, and there are two Black teachers at my school, and the rest are white, and we all work in a North Omaha school. And I think we do need to be not necessarily calling out colleagues, but approaching them more so as maybe they have an unconscious bias rather than an intentional bias towards students when they continuously keep writing them up. As for the CRT strategies, from the 6 articles that I found that there was representation in K through 12 history books and lessons. Oh, did I go over my 5 minutes? How do I stop it? Lastly and finally, I want to talk about the CRT strategies for Latinas from the 6 articles that I found. Number one, I found that there was a needed representation in K through 12 history books and lessons. We need an increase in representation in Latina role models in curriculum, which would further increase engagement, higher aspirations, and dispel stereotypes and misconceptions. Number two, representations and role models in college goers found in Latino and Latina elementary children. Latino and Latina children continue to perceive their ethnicity race in less favorable terms. So making sure that we can find them local role models and making sure that we are shaping how they view college as accessible and aspirational rather than completely impossible or something that is only for smart children. Number three, social studies. When it comes to social studies, especially middle level instruction, it should we as teachers should be engaging in historical thinking and decision making, technology and film and controversial issues and discussions. There were three really good points made in the study, such as middle school social studies, when engaging and relevant to students, allows them to explore race, gender, sexuality, and other issues of social justice directly related to their adolescent development. The second point made in it is that middle level social studies teachers and teacher educators need to alter their thinking of disciplinary methods to be more inclusive of a developmental framework. And lastly, they also talked about how social studies teachers and teacher educators need to reconceptualize social studies curriculum to incorporate global and current events. What I also really liked about this study was that it talked about how some of the teachers, or at least one of them, had used drama pedagogy, which is useful in promoting multicultural empowerment in middle level social studies. Number four, this one was really, really great. It talked about how the hardships that Latinas go through, how they develop personal agency to advocate for themselves and other Latinas through personal, social, and educational experiences. Number five, when it comes to science instruction, especially with elementary students, as the research was done with elementary Latino and Latina students, it should be coinciding with both readings about science and making sure that science instruction is hands on. As well as the findings that they found in the study was that teachers should be questioning why Latino and Latina students are being often denied opportunities for hands on activities. It could be matter of budget in the school or the curriculum that is in place in the school, but we need to make sure we as teachers are making sure that children who are minorities, especially Latinos and Latinas, are getting those opportunities for hands-on activities in science instruction. It also made a really good point in the study that science is usually used as a way to read about in reading and comprehension in the English and language arts subjects. But then when it comes to science, it's usually just read about, glanced over, and moved on. Lastly, when it comes to using CRT, we can use CRT to help Latinas help them evaluate their own culture, the machismo culture, and the double standards against the dominant group. This study really shook me because this study was done in a alternate school setting with girls who were seen as high risk and also had a history of drug use. And the clinicians that worked with them, they were able to talk with the young teenage girls and talk to them about how they view themselves, how others view themselves, and a lot of the time that the stereotypes that is pressed upon them, such as we are cholas, always pregnant, we are hoochie mamas, we are seen as sexually promiscuous, and all we are trying to do is become pregnant and stay home, when that is not the case at all. And with that, as well as representation in K through 12 history books and lessons, we need to make sure we have representation with role models such as Selena Quintanilla and Soto Sotomayor, really great role models that we should be including in history and social studies curriculum. And with that, here are my sources. I hope you have a great day.